Okay, hello everyone. My name is Devin Marispini. I'm a first-year occupational therapy student at Midwestern University, and I'm making this video for my occupational kit in activity analysis. So the category of occupation that I chose is play, and more specifically play participation, not exploration. Now, since play is such a broad category, there's so many different types of games. There's sports, board games, there's tag, imaginative games. I chose to pick one specific game so that I can be able to actually grade and adapt and show an example of this. So you might be able to see this is a twister board right here. So we're going to talk about grading and adapting with twister for certain diagnoses. I'd also like to recognize there's also a social component to this game. Usually it's played with other people, but it's mainly play. So to start off, let's talk about the different diagnoses that I think would definitely benefit from this game. First, kids with autism. This game is good for kids with autism because it challenges their sensory exploration. And once we talk about the different things inside of my kit, that'll make more sense. It also challenges their sensory endurance. It challenges balance, proprioception. It challenges their muscle endurance. And then also some really good social skills, like taking turns or negotiating rules, having good sportsmanship. And finally, also just being creative. And you'll get to see how you can be creative with the other items I introduced in my kit. The other diagnosis I'd like to talk about is those that are paraplegic or paralyzed from the waist down. You may be wondering, how can anyone from the waist down play Twister? And that's where a lot of my adaptations will come into play. But just for now, you should know that it challenges their ability to interact with the ground. So the Twister board can still be on the ground even if they're in a wheelchair. It provides an easy interactive game that doesn't involve a screen for them, one that's actually interactive with the surrounding environment. It challenges their eye coordination, their muscle endurance as well, holding their limbs in certain spots, and also some mental functions like strategy, judgment, just higher level thinking. So let's talk about what's inside of my kit. So you can already see there's the Twister board already out. Inside the game of Twister, the box, there's also this spinner that comes with the game. And then inside of my kit, I brought in a lot of different fun things. So one, we have ball, we have shaving cream, we have a little stuffed animal, we got a cool blue lightsaber, we've got a dart gun, a bag that's full of some lizards and bugs, a bag of beans, and finally this little twister board that I made. So let's start with adaptations. So when it comes to adaptations, let's start with kids with autism. How could we adapt this game for kids with autism if it's not accessible for them? One thing that could change is maybe the social setting. So maybe they're not able to handle playing or taking turns or playing with another person. Maybe they just need to play by themselves. And so that might be something you do with a kid with autism. You just allow them to spin by themselves and they don't need to tangle up with somebody else. Something else you could do is you could change the environment of the room. You could dim the lights if they're too bright. If you needed to, if the colors on the twister board were too distracting or just too much for them, you could dull them by creating your own little circles that have more mellow colors to them. Or even not colors, you could just have it with numbers. So those are a couple ways to adapt for kids with autism. Let's talk about adapting for somebody in a wheelchair. And the first thing I'd like to introduce is this little twister board that I made. And I'd like to call this finger twister. This isn't using the actual mat for Twister, but if you wanted to challenge some fine motor skills, you could still play the game of Twister using the spinner and everything, but this time you say, oh, now you have to use your thumb on blue, and put your pinky on green, and ring finger on orange, and it could become, a similar theme, Twister, just with the hand. So it's just an adapted Twister board. Let's talk about other adaptations. So how is somebody in a wheelchair going to be playing on this actual mat? I have a chair right here so I can demonstrate. So let's pretend that this chair is their wheelchair. and they're sitting in their wheelchair, that's where a lot of those items I showed come into play. So one adaptation could be you have these stuffed animals and they spin the spinner, and let's say they come up with, right hand red. So using their right hand, they have to place and land the stuffed animal right on the red circle. And the same for a couple different items. And we got this blue lightsaber, let's say it lands on, just left hand, yellow. Now they have to touch it and hold it there. And maybe if you had another lightsaber, you could make them do the same thing on a different circle with a different lightsaber. Same concept for this ball. Maybe they have to toss the ball and make it land initially on that blue one. Or this dart gun. They have to shoot that green square. I totally hit it. You just couldn't see it. Anyways, so that's a couple ways somebody in a wheelchair could play Twister. They're not actually putting their limbs on the board, but it's a way to adapt the game. If you did want them to actually put their hands on the board, you actually could hang up the Twister board so that it's on a wall, and then they have to put their hands in certain spots. So that could be a way to adapt as well. You may need to secure the edges of the Twister board so that it doesn't slide for somebody with a wheelchair as well. Those are most of the adaptations that I came up with. There are definitely more as well that you can do. But let's talk about grading. And let's start with grading up. And let's start with kids with autism. How can we make this harder or more difficult for kids with autism? So one thing that I thought of was to increase the sensory component of the game. So that's where a lot of these weird items came into play. We have this bag that has some plastic bugs and a lizard in it. And so let's say you have to put, one of these bugs on each circle here, and now the kid has to, put their hand on the circle while feeling this strange texture of like a bug or a lizard or something. Same with these beans. You put these beans on one, and now all of a sudden they have to be feeling this weird texture. And same concept with the shaving cream. I'll just put a little bit on so you can see, but it could make the game a little more interesting and fun for a kid with autism. They have to all of a sudden place their hand on this shaving cream, and it feels so yucky and gross, but it's challenging their sensory exploration and their sensory endurance as well. How long can they keep their hand on the shaving cream? Another way you could grade up for kids with autism is challenge them to use a different body part for something. All of a sudden they have to use their nose, and they have to put their nose on the blue circle or their elbow, so that can make it harder as well. You could also make them have to spin the spinner while they're in position. Now, grading up for somebody in a wheelchair, give them a limited time to figure out where they need to shoot or where they need to throw the ball, add a time component. Challenge them to use their non-dominant hand. So all of a sudden they got to use their left hand and throw the ball, or throw the stuffed animal or the lightsaber and hold it in position with that non-dominant hand. And lastly, another way to grade up is position them so that they have to cross the midline to do something. Or say, you can only touch the blue and red circles with your left hand. So all of a sudden they have to go like this. And the right hand can only do the green and yellow circles. That can make the game a little more difficult for them. So that would be grading up. And lastly, let's talk about grading down. So to make this more easy, you could eliminate those sensory objects. You could take away, the bugs, the beans, the shaving cream, just make it a flat surface. You could give them more spins. They didn't land on something that is quite easy enough, let them spin again. You could also do scaffolding. So you as the therapist are behind them, and you can help place their hand somewhere, or at least direct them on where to go. And finally, another way to, two more. Instead of using, a big ball, using a small ball, use an even bigger ball. So you could use like a big plastic ball. And lastly, you could just use half of the mat. You could literally fold this in half so that the mat is smaller, there's less options. It makes it a lot easier for them.